Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to today's lunchtime reflection from St Peter Mancroft Church in the centre of Norwich. My name is Gill Persicke and I'm one of the lay ministers here. And it's Ash Wednesday today, so my reflection is going to be on a suitably penitential topic, that of shame. Sounds fun, doesn't it? There's an amusing programme, a comedy programme on Radio 4, which I sometimes listen to. It goes by the name of The Confessional. And it works like this. The host, Stephen Mangan, who's a comedian and an actor, he interviews a famous person and asks them to confess in public to 3 things which they're ashamed of having done. And a surprising range of people have put themselves through this apparent ordeal, including David Tennant, Alistair Campbell, Joan Bakewell, Sheila Hancock. I could go on. And none of them seems, as a result, to have fallen into utter public disgrace. The reason for this is obvious, of course. If you're really genuinely ashamed of something, almost by definition, you're not going to talk about it on the radio. No, the people on the show tend to keep to safe territory. Things they've done, particularly when they were children, actually, because a child can get away with stealing money from his mother's purse or telling whopping great fibs, and people are inclined to forgive or even find it a bit funny. Less so with adults, of course. And remember, we're now living in the era of cancel culture, so that if you dare to express an opinion which is less than fashionable nowadays, you can find yourself being very publicly shamed, slated and ostracised online by friends and by complete strangers. Now, to be honest, this probably doesn't affect people of my generation that much, but for young people who derive so much of their self-esteem from social media, this can be a devastating experience indeed. And I think it reminds us of something very fundamental about shame, the thing which distinguishes shame, I think, from guilt. Guilt is a bad thing to feel, for sure. You know or you judge that you've done something wrong, and you feel responsible for it or remorse for it. And in serious cases, your innocence or guilt is something to be decided in a court of law. But I think it is, of course, possible for someone to be objectively guilty without the world judging that that person should also be ashamed. To take a very extreme example, someone who's been terribly abused by their partner for years and then kills that partner in a moment of passion is probably guilty of manslaughter. But some of us may feel that there should be little shame attached to that crime. We recognise that shame adds another layer of suffering to our guilt. And we question in some cases whether this is right or useful. Because public shaming can destroy people. And society has used it as a weapon. During the Cultural Revolution in China, people regarded as enemies of the party were paraded through the streets with signs around their necks describing their misdemeanours. And this, in a few tragic cases, led to suicide. When France was liberated after the Second World War, women who'd slept with the enemy had their hair shaved off in the public marketplace or square. Terrible public shaming. How on earth do you ever recover from that experience? And in Norwich, About 15 years ago now, I passed a little group of people removing graffiti from an underpass and wearing bright orange bibs bearing the words "Community Payback," so that I, the passerby, would be absolutely certain to know that these people were offenders being punished. Now, I don't know if those orange bibs are still in use, but personally, I hope not, because I really question whether public shaming is of use in rehabilitating people, which must include rebuilding their self-respect, mustn't it? But you, of course, may disagree with me on this one, because it is true that shame, which I have so far made out to be an undesirable thing, shame does have its uses. It may spur us on to mend our ways. And I think this is particularly true of shame, which isn't a public thing, the negative judgment of other people, but the shame we feel about ourselves. Think about it. The words we commonly use for this experience is, "I feel ashamed of myself." It's as though we become a divided person, isn't it? One part of us is the wrongdoer, but another part of us has separated off from that and is standing in judgment of little old me. There are a couple of things I did when I was in my 20s about which I still feel this sense of shame. Things which I will never tell anybody else about. They're between me and my God. And I most certainly wouldn't confess to them in public were anyone daft enough to invite me onto a radio show. Several decades on, the memory of these particular episodes can still make me want to curl up in the fetal position and groan. But I believe I can safely say that I have learnt from these episodes. So therefore, my feelings of shame have done their work. The very business of being alive and active in the world puts each one of us in the way of mucking things up, making horrible misjudgments, that favourite euphemism of the politicians. It puts us in the way of getting things wrong through negligence, through weakness, through our own deliberate fault. But the big question is this: when this happens and our inner judge notices it, so that we find ourselves saying, "I feel ashamed of myself," when this happens, what do? I have 3 suggestions, the first 2 of which are pretty obvious, and the third perhaps less so. First of all, as a Christian, I try to take my sense of shame to my God. In some Christian traditions, there's the sacrament of confession, where believers actually do this by confessing to a priest. I personally don't. But I do speak to God, confess to God, when I know I've done wrong. And critically, I receive something from God. I receive the strength to go deeper into my wrongdoing. And if I've actually caused real harm or damage, really hurt another person, for example, I clearly need to do the second thing, which is, of course, to make amends in any way I can, put things right in a practical way, perhaps, or apologise, or rebuild a damaged relationship, whatever. That much is obvious. But what about the third thing, my third suggestion? I think in everyday life we sometimes do things of which we feel ashamed, but which objectively haven't significantly damaged other people. Our shame simply resides in our own loss of reputation. We've said or we've done something which makes us look crass or idiotic or lacking in judgment. And we suspect that other people think less of us because of it. Have you ever come home from a meeting or a conversation or a party thinking, I said that? I know when this happens to me, and it does quite a lot, my first instinct is to compensate, to be particularly nice to the people who were around, or to try to do something conspicuously worthy in order to mend my reputation. So here's my radical third suggestion. Don't try to mend your reputation. Jesus himself, before his crucifixion, was despised and rejected. So why should I always need to look holier than thou? We are all, at times, crass or idiotic or lacking in judgment. Welcome to the human race. And if you feel ashamed of this, use your shame to grow in humility. Thank you so much for joining me today, and may I wish you every blessing this coming Lent season.